county, I'm not sure. I wanted to introduce Jarrett this morning. Jarrett's come down from Sacramento. Let me pull up his official title. He's the, let's see, the Senior Product Lead in the Department of Technology's Office of Digital Services. His team focuses on delivery around the Digital Identity Program and digital vaccine records. And prior to CDT, he held product-focused roles at the Mental Health Services Authority, Block, and Google. And otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to Jarrett this morning.
Thanks, Vicki, and thank you all for being here. I'm very honored to be part of Data and Donuts, coming back 1st of 2023, to be in this beautiful space. Very excited to get a tour afterwards, so Vicki, maybe I can check with you after. But really what I'm here today is to talk about, on behalf of the state government, our digital identification program and benefits delivery, specifically with Login.gov. So first, for a little bit of background, kind of set the scene. Anybody who's accessed government services as a blanket statement recognizes it can be kind of painful, both for individuals. You have inconvenient appointments, oftentimes a lot of paperwork, long turnaround times to have that paperwork processed, perhaps submitting copies of identification, maybe even original copies that are, again, in that processing time that you are concerned about how your data is being handled at the government level. Not to mention the experiences can be rather confusing. From one program to another, you may be asked to jump through similar hurdles, and the question remains, why do the same thing multiple times for a similar department, maybe even the same agency? And then on the program side, for administrators, it can be very costly to operate. Not just having variance across different programs, having to maintain all of those integrations. Can be rather risky when you have one system that is using certain components, whereas another system has some elements of that tech stack, but then others that may not have longer term support. Just the same, having that disparity across systems and programs can be rather slow to incorporate any changes or policy changes at the agency or department level. And I'll say for this group, a lot of folks working in transit or riding transit to come here and just generally speaking, transit focus. We've heard research showing that out of 200 regional transit agencies that were interviewed, 17 different definitions for what a senior is were found, ranging from ages 55 years old all the way up to 80. Not to mention many different types of criteria that's required for eligibility for transit discounts, not just seniors, but others that may have for discounted programs. So what that means specifically in transit, you're having to prove your eligibility for different jurisdictions. You may have to carry open loop cards, or I should say closed loop cards rather, to work in a system that can mitigate some of those challenges. And then on the transit agency side, again, can be expensive, time consuming to process. Drivers on buses are having to process some on board. So where can we go from the kind of current state for government at large? One answer that we see is bringing digital verification into the fold. So what that allows for is really a way that's easier to use and engage with state services. It's more secure, able to deter bad actors, can be interoperable with systems that also operate more cost effectively. So what that means for people, accessing benefits and programs the same way that they do everything else, via the internet. That can have a common login experience to be able to share certain attributes or information that will allow them to have access to those programs, approve eligibility for a specific service. Also, just from a user experience side, being able to streamline experiences in a digital format. And on the program side, that you're having greater security for those departments and agencies, less risky having to manage many different processes, staff time that is spent having to process paperwork and manage in-person appointments that might not work schedule-wise for those program participants, but also being able to replicate processes, expand that to different programs that have like requirements, policy requirements, and being able to reuse systems that can scale to meet the needs of community members. So we'll go back a little bit to 2021. The state budget for the 2021-2022 fiscal year included some language for our program, a digital identification program with the Department of Technology. Specifically, the language was focused around a digital identification pilot program. So seeking a series of pilot projects that would investigate single sign-on solutions, improve access to the delivery and also management of state programs. There are some restrictions in that language that has led us to some of the decisions of use cases and how we've built the system to date, predominantly around not handling health data subject to HIPAA, educational records subject to FERPA, data on minors, immigration status, as well as geolocation information. That still presents a wide array of programs and services that can benefit from some inclusion of digital verification, which has led us to some of the decisions that we made and partnerships that we've had to date. But first, with that as a backdrop, program started. We have a very lean team, a budget that we're managing, but certainly pales in comparison to some other programs and other departments operating in a similar space. So with that as a backstop, we first wanted to start with our mission. What is our guiding star for our decisions and our program? And that being to provide every eligible person with easy, secure, privacy-preserving access to all of California's digital government services. Fairly lofty, but we wanted to start with that as our area to scale some of the pilots and eventually reach a post-pilot program level implementation. So that as our mission, we have 4 core principles that are guiding the design of our system and the decisions that we make. First, on the security side, informing our design decisions based on user privacy and security in accordance with many of the international guidelines and standards from NIST 863 for digital identity, ISO standards as well, finding where those are most applicable for our use cases and incorporating them throughout our system. And also on the privacy, privacy by design. So that means that we're ensuring user data remains confidential. Also that we're only using the minimum required information to meet the policy requirements of the departments and agencies. We don't want to create a honeypot of user data that creates a target for bad actors. The role that we see for this space of digital identity is more of a transaction-based model, authorization model. Fundamental to those decisions as well is access and equity. So how we can reach the underserved and vulnerable communities that are often left out of digital services from the government across the board. And lastly, openness and transparency. So the process not only of seeking feedback to inform the decisions that we're making, presenting our decisions, our framework in a way that is conducive to feedback and can inform those decisions as we expand, but also relying on open source software everywhere possible, allowing for those integrations with different service providers at each layer of our framework. So those as our design principles. We have our mission in place. We have a team set to accomplish some of the objectives from that legislative information. First, we wanted to build a framework. So that being a framework that leverages information held by one or more identity providers to enable clients, those being state agencies, perhaps local municipalities, regional transit agencies, to identify and determine eligibility for citizens, for riders in the transit space, but really for program participants across the board. So what we did, just this high-level kind of flow of those 3 core systems involved. So you have on the left is the client agency, again, a state, maybe a local agency, perhaps even a private company. The user that is seeking a service from that agency goes to a client-facing application that is connected to our CDT authorization server, what we're calling an identity gateway. And it's at the identity gateway that receives that request from the user engaging at the client application side. That triggers a entering of credentials and authentication at the identity provider. And once that authentication is confirmed, the identity provider will send back user information to the identity gateway. Oftentimes can include sensitive information that is important for us as the handlers to manage, again, with privacy and security at the forefront. So what we're doing is validating that response received from the identity provider. It's a trusted source. And then we're transforming that information in a way that is meeting the policy needs for the client agency, but also is removing some of the sensitive user information to absolve the risk for the agency and the application. So you can think of, as an example, an attribute for an individual being a name or date of birth. So we receive that information from the identity provider, and then the identity gateway is transforming that into, say, is 21 years old, yes or no, or is a senior, yes or no. And it's that claim that is transmitted back to the agency, and upon success, meeting that criteria, the individual sees the page that they were trying to reach and receives the service they're seeking from that agency provider. So we'll talk a little bit of the technicals in terms of a high-level system. This is very difficult to read, I recognize that, but just touching on some of the core components. This is built in Microsoft Azure using an Azure App Service, SQL databases for temporarily storing claim information, also Key Vault for securely storing code secrets. This is based in the Open ID Connect authorization layer, which is part of the OAuth 2.0 authorization framework. And really, in technical terms, this is a RESTful HTTP API using a JSON as a data format. Then I'll touch another view, kind of as I described at the high-level components of client agency to identity provider and identity gateway in between. We have an application state machine, so how the systems are interoperating with one another and each layer of the flow for an authorization. And then on the left, you have the authorization or authentication request lifecycle. So again, that flow of requests all the way through from user at the browser run by the client agency, all the way to their identity provider where they're authenticating or perhaps verifying their identity, and back through the identity gateway for that authorization that we're facilitating. Okay, so we saw the components. First, the client agency. That is the application that is run by the client agency is one piece. CDT, Department of Technology, manages the identity gateway, that centerpiece, a fulcrum between application and identity provider. So, I mean, first off, we could have gone and built our own identity solution. It would have been very costly, time intensive, both resources we really didn't have. So by going outside, that allowed us to fulfill a principle of achieving multiple providers or enabling the opportunity for multiple identity providers to operate in our framework. And we didn't expect everybody to be on board with Login.gov out the gate. Some would prefer their commercial solution that they know and love. But we went for Login.gov specifically as our initial identity provider for a number of reasons. First, the shared principles. We talk about security, access, and equity, both very fundamental to the decisions that Login.gov has made for their authentication and identity verification solution, particularly, again, focusing around communities in need that often are left out of digital service delivery. On the one hand, they've performed some research into the identity verification using biometrics and recognizing some of the challenges of facial recognition that exclude important communities that programs are targeting to reach. Outside of that, there's funding that they had received in 2021 to the tune of $187 million from the Technology Modernization Fund, not just in terms of addressing those equitable use cases for identity verification, but also performing or exploring ways that in-person methods can really benefit a lot of individuals. And that's some of the initial work doing some pilots with USPS field offices on the East Coast that is currently expanding from, I think, maybe a dozen or so offices and moving nationwide. Additionally, they support multiple languages. Spanish is one of the most spoken languages in California, and that's default for all the Login.gov content in their application. Also French, and of course English. Second, that their code is entirely open sourced, and they have a robust service offering and library for support resources and channels for any technical questions all the way through partnerships. Outside of that, right, simple and secure, adhering to many of those international security standards and guidelines that guide operation in the space, and a large footprint, rather, and a proven track record at the federal level. The statistics I had seen are upwards of 30 million citizens and businesses that are using Login.gov to access hundreds of services from upwards of 30 federal programs. And some of that funding that they received through the Technology Modernization Fund was specifically around expanding their offering for authentication, identity verification services to non-federal entities, so state governments, local entities, governments, as well as tribal communities. And lastly, an important piece that we value was that they're publicly owned and operated. This is a non-commercial entity, which seems appropriate for the data of Californian citizens or perhaps non-citizens that are engaging with state services. It was fundamental to our initial launch of our demonstration. So granted, there are some known limitations that we had with choosing Login.gov. One, that they're not IAL2 compliant, that identity assurance level 2 that has facial recognition and biometrics as part of the authentication flow. Second, that their particular identity verification service requires a social security number, so excluding folks that do not have social security numbers to obtain access or prove their eligibility for a given service. And the last piece, part of the identity verification flow that Login.gov requires is a phone number verification. And that was something that we explored in user testing that had some challenges for some individuals that didn't have a phone number associated with their name, or did and ran into other issues in that flow. So despite some of those limitations, we still recognized or felt that this was an important first step and something that would grow as Login.gov expanded their offering and improved their product through enhancements in the future. So how do we go live, right? This is some kind of high-level components that were part of our flow. This is something we started in March of last year and ended up going live with our solution with Login.gov, also some of our partners that I'll speak to in a second, but doing so in August. And so some of the I think, important call-outs here, first and foremost, was the contract. That was the single greatest amount of time spent on any of these components, I think to the tune of 2 or 3 months to have the contract solidified between our State Department of Technology, and the Federal General Services Administration. There were 2 pricing models included in Login.gov. Happy to talk about that later, but just as a basic overview, there's an enterprise tiering model as well as a transactional based model now. And both of those cases, the authentication piece is a fraction of a cent per user, and the identity verification is $5 per active user in both of those models. There's a one-time platform initiation fee, but again, this is all part of the scope for delivering pilots. Made sense for cost effectiveness for us. Outside of that, there's, on the technical side, integrating our application in Login.gov's sandbox environment. That was a relatively straightforward process. Again, they have a ton of documentation out there. There's a couple links in the slide just before. You can reference the developer library. But once having that application in the sandbox, then being able to test and validate the connection, that we're receiving the attributes as expected, that we're modeling our authorization server appropriately so that our claims that we're transmitting to the client are matching up and, again, meeting with their policies. There was an element of branding too, providing logos, some copy for that sign-in page for Login.gov, where users would initially go to either sign into their account or create an account. Also help for a copy to kind of orient the individual to that page, while they're going from the client application into now a different system. So that was an opportunity for us to incorporate there. Lastly, the piece here to get to production, there's a process on the Login.gov side, which required a number of steps, but I'd say the most surprising was the authority to operate, and that being a process that required some additional penetration testing, sign off from our security office. We, being the State Department of Technology, set security standards for all state services that still required a higher level sign off for that document in order for Login.gov to show that we have the authority within our personnel within our security office to go forward. So again, that, I think, process took a couple of months for the ensuring the right contact, having the testing completed, having all the reporting in place for Login.gov. But this, in a high level, our way to go live with our product. And so what that go live looked like, we launched in August of 2022, this being a partnership with our friends at the California Integrated Travel Project, many of whom have compiler folks I see in the room who we've been working closely with over the past year. And it made a lot of sense for us to begin as our initial pilot demonstration in the world of transit, given the need, given the readiness, both for our partner in Cal ITP, but also the readiness of Login.gov and the additional partner of the Monterey Salinas Transit Agency. So these being regional transit agencies that are seeking to deliver benefits and discounts for transit fares to their community members. And they were ready by working with Cal ITP to promote the benefits application back into production. And it was that authorization piece to handle the eligibility verification that we brought in and were able to provide with Login.gov. So Cal ITP benefits, many of you will be familiar with already. Client-facing application, available in English and Spanish, mobile-friendly. And really the key element here is providing that way for individuals to automatically have their discount that they're eligible for applied to their bank card. So that means that in this case, we're providing the age verification for seniors. So that policy was set at a senior defined as someone who's age 65 years or older. And they'd be able to go through the flow for verifying their identity and verifying their eligibility for their discount one time. And so there would not be a recurring process that you'd need multiple accounts to go through or have to do on a recurring basis by way of having the integration with Cal ITP benefits, able to have that all in one space. So from the data handling side and the kind of flow, individual would log in to the Login.gov, verify their age and register their bank card. The data that is required for that flow, input into Login.gov, transmitted back to us, the Department of Technology, through the Identity Gateway. We transform that, so we're really the handlers of the risk for the user information, and pass that back, in this case, to Cal ITP through the Benefits app. It's LittlePay that is handling the payment information, so entering one's bank card. Must be a contactless bank card. You can add multiple bank cards if you have multiple cards that you're using to apply your discount on the bus. And for the verification piece, I'll just note there are really three core elements. First, the identity of an individual. So that includes a state-issued ID card, could be offered from any state in the United States. Also, that social security number as part of the verification. And third, the phone number associated with the individual's name. And then the last, upon completing that verification flow, having your bank card uploaded, you complete the process, you're able immediately to then go and ride the bus and tap on the onboard terminals, be able to pay the discounted fare. So this is something that we're looking to expand within Monterey Salinas Transit for additional types of verification, but specifically for seniors to expand that in other transit agencies that also offer senior discounts. So we have upcoming is Sacramento Regional Transit planned for the coming weeks, and Santa Barbara Transit Agency sometime later this year. So we'll note in terms of metrics, right, the initial demonstration, we wanted to start small. We wanted to prove out the viability of the system and also ensure the appropriate handling of information throughout the flow. We also did so with Monterey Salinas Transit with minimal marketing. So to date, our numbers are about 40 total enrollments to date. And we've received some rounds of user testing and received feedback noting that largely the flow is very intuitive, right? It makes sense. People understand each leg of the process, the information that's being provided, all very intuitive. Second, we've also received some feedback noting that the identity verification piece is really cumbersome. There's about 17 steps to get through the verification through Login.gov. That's something we've discussed with Login.gov, have some mechanisms in place to how to reduce some of those steps. But that is, on the one hand, a very lightweight authenticating flow versus the more cumbersome identity verification flow needed for our use case here. But just in terms of numbers, I want to call out the median time spent we found is 8 minutes for somebody in the Login.gov flow. And about 45% of people spend under 5 minutes in the Login.gov flow. We're assuming that it's likely tied to already having an account, so they're not going through all 17 steps to perform the identity verification. You have already done that, can simply sign in, authenticate, and move forward. But that said, so we have our first demonstration with Login.gov, with Cal ITP in Monterey Salinas. I'd mentioned some additional transit agencies that we're going to be rolling out for senior discounts later this year. So that being kind of the first and foremost is adding additional demonstrations. Additionally, adding more partners on both sides of our framework. So one on the client side, people that can offer this service, this verification service to their users, their program users. And then also on the identity provider side. We currently have Login.gov as our primary identity provider. There are use cases that Login.gov is not currently able to address or fulfill. And so how we can meet those needs of individuals, perhaps by other companies, other solutions, publicly owned or privately owned, that accommodates those key use cases. So bringing in additional organizations to the fold for the identity verification and eligibility piece. But I'd say the thing that we're most excited about is expanding the verification types that we're able to handle. So right now, we're enabled for age verification. That could expand beyond seniors. But other areas we're currently in the works of integrating is for income status, particularly with low-income use cases. Additionally, on the veteran status. So different programs that the state offers or local agencies offer that are catered towards veterans, how this system can be used to facilitate that verification flow. Student and university affiliation. I'm a member of a university. Maybe I have access to discounted transit fares, free transit fares for my jurisdiction. Can prove kind of that eligibility through this flow digitally. And then last, also with people with disabilities, an important piece in the world of transit, as well as outside for other state services. And then lastly, we're still in a pilot program. We're coming up to the end of that 2-year pilot period. We're in the process of expanding or extending for an additional year. And that really, the key there is to prove out additional use cases for verification types, but really give us the foundation that we need to jump from pilot program to full-blown IT project at the state level. So expanding to other departments, other agencies, and use cases all included. And that's all the slides that I had. And now maybe I'll hand over to Vicki and we could do Q&A.